Autism is not a disease, but a neurodevelopmental disorder. The Spectrum-Autism support group is committed to create awareness around autism spectrum disorder and to build a community which is empathetic and inclusive. To take this message forward and to bring more people towards the cause, we conducted an art festival for the entire month of March where people were invited to draw, doodle, paint or scribble and choose their theme to express themselves in the most unique way. The Spectrum Autism support group also invited several experts from the field of occupational therapy, psychiatry, speech therapy, counselors, and parents to share their journey, their struggles, and their success stories with us. And in this series, we also conducted a mentorship session for the parents having special need kids. To build an environment which is empathetic and inclusive, we conducted a musical extravaganza where neurotypical and neurodivergent artists came together to perform and to spread the message that music heals and how it connects each other. On 2nd of April, the World Autism Awareness Day, we conducted a workshop which was around dance movement therapy in association with Mansa Bharat's Anartha Dance Academy, Sona Kids Play School, and Squirrel Play School, where more than 400 students participated in this program. And we took the awareness concept and we took this drive to the grassroots level where it really matters most in the schools. To take this message forward, now we invite the corporates to join us in writing slogans around what inclusion means to them. तो आइए विशिष्टताओं को अपनाएं। द स्पेक्ट्रम ऑटिज्म एक पहल है ऑटिज्म के बारे में जागरूकता और संवेदनशीलता को हर उस दिल तक पहुंचाने की जो मानवीय संवेदनाओं के लिए धड़कता है। रास्ता मुश्किल ही सही, पर आपका साथ और प्रोत्साहन हमें हमारी मंजिल की ओर चलते रहने को प्रेरित करता रहेगा। And with this message, we take this opportunity of conducting this particular community sensitization program in association with InclusivEd. The founder director of InclusivEd, Naomi Menon, is with us. Naomi runs an inclusive education center in Bangalore. She is MS in Counselling Psychology herself, and she is a special educator. So let's hear from Naomi and let's take this step together.
So today we are going to, I'm going to talk about neurodiversity and what it means and what the term means and how we need to change some of the language that we use when we talk about people with disabilities. So give me a minute, I'm going to share my screen and we can start. So as you all know, it is we're trying to build awareness about autism, and like Shivali said, April is also known as the Autism Awareness Month. The 2nd of April is the day when we, when we celebrate people with autism or autistic people. So the first thing that I would like to address is on neurodiversity. I don't know if many of you know what the term is or why we use this particular term. So neurodiversity is basically when the development or the formation of the brain, how brains are different from each other. So it's a natural variation in the way different brains function, their cognitive functioning. No brain is good or bad. It just is. It's just developed that way. It's formed that way. Some children, their brains are wired differently, and therefore they can be labeled or diagnosed with certain disabilities. Neurodivergent, when we use the term neurodivergent, we refer to a person whose brain functioning is different from what we term as normal. So in simpler terms, it refers to an individual whose brain just functions differently, maybe in the way that they communicate, maybe in the way that they see the world, their perspective, the way in which they behave. So just different ways of being. And so therefore neurodivergent can be used, it's a term that can be used to refer to people with disabilities. Neurotypical is the opposite of neurodivergent, right? So Neurotypical is used to refer to people whose brain functioning is what we call typical, a typically developing brain. And therefore, majority or most people in society, like you and me, are neurotypical, where our brain functioning is termed as normal. But normality is well defined by us. So we define what is normal and what is not. I myself do not prefer to use the term normal. So therefore, I wanted to start off with this, where we learn about these terms and how we can use these terms in our language now, in ways in which we refer to people, with labels or diagnoses. So I I'm guessing we can't take questions right now, but later on in the session, if you all do have any questions, I would be glad to answer them. So the purpose of this session is to spread awareness, is to understand people with disabilities, whether they're on the spectrum or otherwise, learning disabilities, ADHD, the intellectual disabilities, the different varieties that are out there. One of the things that we need to remember when we talk about people is either identity first language or person first language. So identity first language is when you refer or you talk to a person, and when you're talking to this person, for example, you say autistic individual or autistic person, right? When you refer to them as person with autism, you're using person first language. Now, many people in the autistic community do prefer identity first language, but it's always good to ask the person who, what they prefer and how they would like to identify themselves. And that is one thing that is very important when we are either talking to a person with disability or talking about them. Instead of using, so there are children, who are on the spectrum, who are non-verbal or non-speaking. So they aren't able to verbally communicate, but they can communicate through other means and other maybe devices, right? So when now the terms that we use to speak to or to refer to a person who is non-verbal, we say non-speaking, right? Again, ask the person how they would like to be called or referred. There are no dearth of questions, that you can ask a person with disability or a disabled person. Again, if you are referring to people who are sort of normal, we use the term neurotypical to refer to a child or an individual who is typically developing, so meets all the milestones, is, maybe forms a majority of a certain group or society. Anytime that we're talking to a person with disability or about them, the language that we use is very important. So the words, so sometimes we use certain words like lame or retarded or abnormal, right? So all that, the more we reflect on it, the more we understand why we're saying those words or when we're saying it, in what context we're using it. Nobody is saying you need to stop immediately. There's no way you can say any of these words ever again. But it's important to understand that these words do affect disabled people. These words do have an effect on people. And so what the language that we use, the words that we use, it is important to remember, what kind of language we're using. Communication, why I've said communication, because like I said, there are some kids who communicate in different ways, right? Whether they verbally say something to you, or they type something to you, or they draw something for you, right? They are still expressing themselves. And as typically developing people, we rely a lot on our voice and our speech to communicate. But if that person prefers or wants to communicate in other ways, we also need to be open and provide that accessibility to communicate with them. For many people who do know about autism, a lot of the times children are referred to or put on these different levels: high functioning, low functioning, right? But autism is a spectrum. A child can be anywhere on that spectrum, right? It's not a linear line where a child comes either low or high. The child can be anywhere in that circle with different strengths, with different challenges, with different ways of communicating, with different interests, right? So we don't use functioning levels anymore. I think this is also more to educators who work with autistic children, where sometimes, we do refer to a certain child who is performing as close to grade level, or who is sort of meeting all the criteria when, as a typically developing child. So when we look at this individual with autism, we sometimes term them as high functioning, and that is something that we do not want to do anymore. And of course, for me as well, it has been a learning journey. It's not like I started off saying all the right terms and I used all the right language immediately. The last 9 years it has been a learning journey. It has been me trying to reflect and trying to make sure that I'm saying the right terms. And even if I'm not, I need to understand that I've made a mistake and I need to be able to change. Cognitive disability instead of mental disability. So anytime we're referring to or we're talking about disabilities, it's better to use this term, cognitive disability. Now, a lot of the times I work with children who are either very young, so maybe around 5 or 6, and sometimes people who know what I do, they will always feel sympathy for the parent who has an autistic child, right? But that's also because as a society we have deemed disability to be bad, to be a problem, to be to be something that is that's major, that's like we put it on a pedestal of sorts. But disability, it's not bad. We just define it as such. It of course has challenges. Even a typically developing child has challenges, right? But we try and make sure that children who are born with autism or learning disabilities, we try to put them in this box, and we try to have sympathy for the parents, or we say, oh my god, what is going to happen with you, what is going to happen with their lives, and make it into a problem. But it's not a problem, and it's not a problem that we need to fix, right? It is a condition. It's a condition like anything else that we have, and it is a condition that can be supported if the community comes together. And the community means the parents, the school, the special educators, and general people at large. A lot of the times when I speak about disability, where I'm always asked whether there's a cure, and what will will the child be able to get out of it? Will they not have it later, right? But it's not a cure. There's no cure as such for these disabilities, because it's not a disease. Anytime we have a medical issue, there is a cure, there is a treatment, because it is a disease that we have. Our body is reacting to something. But when we talk about autism, when we talk about ADHD, when we talk about learning disabilities, it is a disorder. It's a condition that the child is born with, but the child has everything else also going for him or her, right? Their child has other strengths and other ways of being and communicating and all of that. So we need to try and remember that one is, don't ask about a cure, and two, remember that it's not a disease. It is a disorder. It is a condition that the person is born with. I think the most important of all of these is to ask questions. If you feel that the child is too young, ask the parent, right? The parent is the best person to give you maybe answers, or even just open an honest discussion about it. So anytime that you are stuck, anytime that you feel you don't know what to say, or you don't know where to go from, well, how to have a conversation with this person, ask questions. Most often than not, the person will respond and will appreciate that you have asked those questions. For everybody who knows and doesn't know, autism is it's a spectrum. It is like the picture shows. It is not a linear line. It is a circle, and a child can fall anywhere in that circle. Now, no two children with autism are the same. Like no two typically developing children are the same, right? Of course, there are commonalities. There are things that can be similar between children on the spectrum, like with typically developing children, but it does look different in different people. It is a neurodevelopmental disability that affects the way people communicate, behave, or interact with others. But I also want to point out that communication, behavior, and interaction, social interaction, are all defined by us as people in the society, right? We define what is communication. We define what is supposedly good behavior or poor behavior. We define the rules of social interaction. So autistic people just have a different way of doing these things. Some people might have very noticeable characteristics, very noticeable challenges, and others might not. And it's hard to say who will have what or who will not have what. The common thread, of course, is social skills. Social skills, again, it is how we define it. We say that it is good to, every day in the morning, wish your parents good morning, right? We define that that's the way it's supposed to be. But maybe not. It doesn't have to, those rules don't have to be that way. Okay. Of course, there are certain social rules that are important for society to live together in a cohesive manner. But there are certain social skills that can be let go of a little bit, especially because we perceive them or we interpret them with our lens, with our perspective, and not from the perspective of the person with disability. Like I said, wide variation of type and severity of challenges that people experience. And it occurs in every group, whether you are, rich, poor, whether you come from a developed country, a third world country, in any social group, it can occur. It's not affected by any of those issues. So before I show you the signs, I sort of want to also put out like a disclaimer that these signs are more in terms of how it's a clinical perspective of autism. So these are certain signs that doctors or pediatricians, developmental pediatricians look at these signs, and therefore then can diagnose a child with autism. Sometimes the child may not have any of these signs or may not have all of the signs, but still can be autistic. A lot of autistic adults do sometimes diagnose themselves based on certain signs and based on certain ideas that they have about their own selves and their own behaviors. So I want to, just put it out there that these are signs that we look at from a clinical perspective, but don't go and look at every child and say, okay, he or she meets these signs and therefore they fall on the spectrum. Social skills, sometimes children don't respond to their name by their first birthday, so sometimes that can be an issue. Children prefer to play on their own. There is not much social interaction with people around them. it can be a sign, right? So I'm not going to go through all of them. Some of them people know. One of the major one of the major signs that people do know about is eye contact, right? Now, a lot of the times when children are 2 or 3 years old, we do try, typically developing children do make eye contact with people around them. Children, autistic children, sometimes do not make eye contact because it becomes difficult for them. They physically cannot make eye contact, right? So when you have a child, an older child who's 8 or 9 or 10, and they are not able to look at you and talk, and they're looking everywhere else, it's not because they don't want to, it's because they physically cannot make that happen. Joint attention issues is when, for example, the mother is pointing to a certain object and she tries to get the child to point to the or see the object. The child is not able to pay attention to that. That comes under joint attention issues. So these are signs for in terms of social interaction. Communication skills. So delayed speech and language skills, that milestone when children are not or do not speak at that particular age that they are supposed to, like a typically developing child, it can pose an issue or it can pose a challenge. We are not saying that all children who have a delayed milestone are on the spectrum, but it's good to get an assessment done just to see what is happening and why the child has delayed speech. Sometimes you will find children who do speak, but they speak in a very sort of flat tone. They don't really have the levels or the different sort of tones that we use. And again, sometimes they can be on the spectrum. Echolalia is when children repeat sentences that you have said. So if I say, I want food, the child will say the same sentence, right? Again, echolalia is a form of communication. It is not something that we sort of dismiss. We use that communication, we use that form of communication to then figure out how to support the child. Not using the common gestures that you and I, that neurotypically people use, and sometimes not responding to things that we want them to respond to. Some autistic children do find it difficult to take a joke or to understand a joke. Sometimes it is, again, not all children, not all adults who are on the spectrum have this issue, but there are children who are autistic who do not or are not able to understand jokes. So that can be a sign of autism. This is one area that I think all of us as educators, as parents, as people in the community, this is something that you will see, right? This is something that is more obvious, right? So some of the signs that are typically associated with autism is the hand flapping, the twirling, the spinning, the child keeps going around, round and round and round, the lot of movements, the child is hyper. So these can come, if you do see these signs, then they can tell us that the child is autistic. Now, we call these signs stimming. Stimming is, again, it is a self-regulation tool. So children use stimming to regulate their emotions, to help them, to help them be in a social situation, to help calm themselves down. So we as educators do not discourage stimming, or we don't want to discourage stimming. We want to ensure that the child is stimming in a way that is safe for him or her and everybody else. And every child has different stimming behaviors. You might not see two children who have the same stimming behaviors. Specific routines or rituals, a lot of the children that I have worked with do prefer when I use structure in my sessions, or do things every session the same way, so that they understand what to expect. So it's not that they are just that they're just sticking to a routine. They find comfort in routines because they understand what to expect. The expectations are already set in them, so therefore there's no anxiety about what is going to happen. The lack of coordination, clumsiness. Now, a lot of these signs, do not all children will have them, but that child still may have autism, right? So these are just signs. If you are a parent of a young child at the age of 2 or 3 or even older, and maybe there are some signs that you see and you can find here, I don't want you to, panic or immediately worry, but it's good to get an assessment. There's nothing wrong with getting an assessment done, just to understand what is happening with the child. Now, in my line of work and with people that I meet, I do hear a lot about autism. I do hear a lot of misconceptions about the disorder. And I've just highlighted 4 of them here. If anybody has heard any other misconceptions about autism, you can comment in the chat box. So one of the misconceptions that I've heard is children or parents of other children point to the autistic child and say, oh, you do not look like you have autism, right? But autism doesn't really have, there's no look, there's no physical structure that says that person has autism. It is a disorder, it's a condition, it is in a way a hidden disability, because there's no physical change in the person. So every child also with autism responds differently. So we don't really have one look or one kind of person with autism. One of the misconceptions: my children will copy their behaviors. Now, this I've heard a lot because I work with schools where we're trying to promote inclusion, we're trying to encourage inclusion, and parents of neurotypical children would often ask us, they're very scared of their children copying the behaviors of autistic children, and I find that very very hard to believe, because children imitate anyway, right? Children will imitate you as an adult. Children will imitate other kids, neurotypical kids also, right? So it's not that they will just imitate autistic children, and not all autistic children have certain behaviors that they do all the time. And why are we terming all these behaviors negative, right? So the lot of things associated with this particular misconception. But children basically imitate each other in order to have a sense of belonging, in order to be part of that social group. And that's how they build those friendships, by imitating each other. And we do it as well. If we want to, if we want to make a new friend, we try and find out what their interest is, and we find similarities between the two of us. And that's the same thing that children do at a young age as well. Another, very strong misconception about autistic people is that they don't have, or they don't show empathy. They don't show love. They don't show, they don't show their emotions, right? But in my years of working with autistic children, I've only seen them showing love and affection and joy and happiness, and but in their own ways. It's not like, maybe they won't come and hug you, maybe they won't come and tell you that they love you, but they'll do it in very small ways that tell you that they do care about you, they do want to know more about you, they do love you. And I think this is a very very strong misconception that is there about autism, that we need to now start dismissing. And now the last one is something that I have heard when and when I've heard from a parent who has an autistic child, who has seen another autistic child that I've worked with, and has assumed that, oh, it's going, that child is better because that child can communicate in a way that she wants her child to communicate. So, these ideas that we have about autism and autistic children and how they need to look and how they need to behave and how they need to fit in within this box that we as people, as society, put. It's very strong even in parents of autistic children, right? uh, but we need to understand that children, like neurotypical children, they need that time, they need that space and support to develop, to just be themselves and learn more about themselves and communicate in their own ways. You don't need to you don't need to verbally talk to let people know that you're smart or you're gifted or you are you're intelligent or anything of that sort. So these are 4 misconceptions that I have come across in my work, but if anybody has heard any others, please do let me know. So, one strong belief of mine is in inclusive education. Now, I think a lot of the parents that Shivali has spoken to, and some of the parents that I have spoken to, and autistic children as well, is one of the major areas of need for them from the community is inclusion. They want to be included and they want to be a part of all the social interactions that we as neurotypical people have, right? So social inclusion is very important for all of us. It's not just for the autistic community, it is for us as neurodeveloping people as well. Sorry, my bad, neurotypically developing people. Because we also learn from them. We also learn how to how to see the world. We learn different perspectives. We learn, just different ideas. And so it's therefore all about having these different people in this social group and coming up with, great things, coming up with great ideas. And one thing that we need, where we can start, is education, right? Because that is the place where children learn how to be with another person who is not part of their close family, right? They learn how their peers are. They learn how children who are of the same age, how they behave. They learn everything from each other. So when we start including, when we start inclusion at a very young age, right from preschool to your LKG, UKG, and then your mainstream school, children then grow up with each other throughout. And so therefore, then later on, society also then starts to become more inclusive, right? We then start to we start to get jobs that are more accessible. We start to have buildings that are more accessible. We start to have, different places of social interaction more accessible, right? So inclusive education is one of the starting points when we talk about social inclusion. Now, this is not to say that all children need to be put in mainstream schools and all children need to be in one kind of education setting, but it is a good starting point. It's a good place to see how children interact with each other and how we can ensure that they are learning from each other and they are then going to form this society later on that is diverse and inclusive. So I think in the certificate, you all might have seen the word ally. Now, people working with disabled people, people who are supporting them, educators, parents, advocates of people with disabilities, we are all allies of the community, right? We're all allies of the autistic community. So some of the ways in which we can be allies, One is we need to keep learning. We need to keep understanding what the other person needs, what the other person wants. We need to keep learning about the new terms, about the new language, about how we need to let go of certain perspectives, certain misconceptions. So we need to keep learning. Like I said at the beginning, you have to ask questions. And I do that with my kids as well, especially the older ones. If I want to know how they identify themselves, or how they want me to refer to them, anything, I have to ask them what they want, right? So a child at the age of 12, 13 can tell you that this is how he wants to be referred to. Push for inclusion in schools. Now, as parents and as people living in society, as teachers, we can start, once we talk about inclusion, once we hold schools accountable, once we start questioning the authorities, once we start doing all these things, we can start moving towards inclusive schools. Right now, a lot of the schools do take in children with disabilities, but it's more integrative, where you have the child in the classroom, but then the child is also taken out into a resource room and taught there as well. But we want to make it more inclusive rather than integrative. Play dates. Now, a lot of parents of young children, especially, do organize play dates with each other, and sometimes neurodivergent children are left out of those social interactions, because sometimes parents don't know how to plan for that neurodivergent child, or how to even interact with that neurodivergent child. So again, as a parent of a neurotypical person, you need to ask the question. You need to figure out or ask the other parent, what does the child need? What are their sensory needs? What can they eat? What any question that will make this interaction a lot more conducive. But if you include them in these interactions, it becomes easier, it becomes better for both children to become friends. I have had quite a few parents who say that their children are not invited for birthday parties, as simple as that, where because they're on the spectrum, or ADHD, or any other label that they may have, neurodivergent children are sometimes excluded from these social gatherings. And I mean, to me, that sounds quite bad, because you want your child to be invited, you want your child to be included in that space. And it is possible to make sure that neurodivergent children are part of that social interaction. You just have to ask those questions, right? Make things accessible for all kinds of people. So whether it is physical accessibility, or whether it is to do with social accessibility, in terms of talking through a device, or in terms of being part of a social group where the person cannot enter a certain building, or the person needs other accommodations to be part of that space. We need to be mindful of that, and we need to start providing that. Right? So people who work in companies, software companies, people who are architects, any kind of profession that you're in, you can try and see how do you make things more accessible for neurodivergent people. Become an advocate. So now, hopefully, after this, after this session, you yourself will start advocating for people with disability. You will start speaking out, against ableism, ableistic language. You will start correcting yourself. You'll start becoming more inclusive in your workplace, or even in your family settings, right? So you can become advocates of people with disabilities. Again, language, very, very important, to know what kind of terms that can be used, to understand why to use those terms, and to just be reflective of the language that you use. sometimes when you see children with Down syndrome, or children who with on the spectrum as well, who probably are, I don't know, they're having a challenging time in a social setting. A lot of the times we just stand around and look, and we don't really figure out, okay, how do I support this parent, or how do I support this child, right? So we need to be more mindful of our responses and our reactions to children, to neurodivergent people. And it is okay to make mistakes. So I'm not saying you need to completely change your language today, but it's good to understand that sometimes you may use the word normal instead of neurotypical, and you may say, special needs child instead of neurodivergent. But it's okay to do that. But as long as you are then reflecting and you're saying, okay, now how do I change, and how do I, from now on, how do I use better language when I speak to people. Now, I have one student who I really wanted his voice to be heard. I wanted his thoughts to be heard. And so it was very important for me before this session to ask him questions and, find out what he thinks about this, about how we can spread awareness about autism. So I'm going to sort of read out how he's identified himself. And I've written it down because I don't want to make a mistake with it. So he has identified himself as Tarun Paul Matthew, autistic person, lover of music, free thinker, and a good person, according to majority of people that have known me. So he has identified himself in that way. He is a non-speaking 15-year-old boy. And so I've asked him a few questions, and I would like to read that out, and then I will end my long talk. So one of the questions that I've asked is, what would you like people to understand about autism or autistic people? There is a world of difference in how autistics perceive things. Questions are rarely asked to autistics about autism. Maybe that needs to change first. Only the people following that tend to understand us. Creating connections totally depends on no judgments and an open mind to celebrate and accept a difference. Over. So he types over every time he wants to, that's the way he tells us that he's ended what he wants to say. How can neurotypical people become allies? They can assume that we are merely people let down. Maybe just ending the treating us as lesser people would help. They could want to let protecting only not be the goal, but also letting us live our lives the way we want to. Towering over this should be the need to trust that we are capable above all. Yes, to become allies, the thinking that the experts are the autistics needs acceptance. And I think I also when I saw him, type this sentence out, I went through my own reflection at that time in the session, because I didn't think of it in that way, that, instead of me talking as an ally, maybe an autistic adult herself should have been here talking about autism, right? And we in the community need to now start giving those opportunities, or start providing those opportunities in those spaces for autistic individuals to come out and talk about autism themselves, because they are the ones experiencing it and going through it on a daily basis. What does it mean to be included as you are? To not be judged or made to change myself, but be accepted the way I am. Is there any example you can give on acceptance and inclusion of autistics? Addressing awareness deficits allows for more acceptance and inclusion of autistics. For me, this did occur most importantly at school. My classmates gathered around me on a lot of occasions to make me take part in many programs at school, like banking on me playing the keyboard during class assembly. Tarun is an excellent piano player, and he's also done the exams. I'm not sure which level, but he's also done the exams. And he till now he is part of an inclusive setup. It is a mainstream school in Bangalore, and he is part of the classroom. He's not been taken out for any sessions. He has been taught in the same classroom. He's done his ninth grade exams, everything. It's all, he's in the same boat as the neurotypical children. How do you feel when you are a part of a social group? The possibility of hearing that stops causing painful personal loneliness. Spontaneous, good interactions are great. Over. Any last thoughts about what you would like to tell people about autism? Yes. Only offer to let us wear our neurology instead of getting us to fit our perfect selves into imperfect molds. Panic overrides powerful sensory inputs, leading you through totally frantic race-seeking sanity and calm. Introducing that calm helps in affecting panic, totally not leading to powerful meltdowns. People have to offer safe places so that we autistics get the time to recover well. Perfect would mean that be quiet and only try to help if requested. Over. So he's brought up a very important point also, that a lot of the times we feel we need to help them because they're not doing it as good as us, or they're not, they're not doing it properly or in a way that we want them to. And it's so good that he's brought this up, because we need to make sure that we can make sure that they know we are here to help them, but don't step in unless they ask for it. So I, of course, asked him, I mean, his mom then has asked him whether his name would like to be shared for today, and he's replied yes. And that's how he has said he would like to be identified. So with that, thank you so much. I hope I did not speak too fast. And I hope you all, gathered as much information as possible through this. And yeah, and I'll now pass it on to Shivali to take it forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. And I thank Naomi for being there to support the cause. On behalf of the entire team, the Spectrum Autism, I thank you once again. And let's just make the world more inclusive and more warm and empathetic for everybody around. Thank you so much, and good night, everybody.